regulations that are coming out of Sustainable America. ICLEI goes directly from the United Nations into your backyard. There's no intermediate stop. They're implementing Agenda 21. They have bragged and bragged and bragged about it throughout time. They're denying it now, but nonetheless, they still do it. For instance, ICLEI at the global level is still basically, if you actually look at their website, their key point is that this approach links local action to internationally agreed upon goals and targets such as what? Agenda 21, there it is. So if you have ICLEI in your neighborhood, you are implementing Agenda 21 directly. You're not going through Sustainable America. That includes the Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Convention on Desertification, although it doesn't pertain up here, the Habitat Agenda, and the Johannesburg Plan for Implementation, which was down in Johannesburg in 2002. I attended that meeting. This is a huge, huge agenda, folks. Now, in the state of New Hampshire, you have Keene, Nashua, Portsmouth, and Wolfboro as members of ICLEI. When you really begin to understand what ICLEI is, communities that belong to ICLEI are rapidly rejecting them. Over 150 communities and counties and so forth across America have now rejected ICLEI. Kicked them out. Because what they do is so utterly damaging to their community and their economic base. It sounds wonderful, but in actual opportunity, it basically systematically destroys your economic base. In reality, smart growth and comprehensive planning dramatically increases congestion because you have more people per smaller area that still use their automobiles. Increases air pollution because you got more automobiles per square mile. And more stoplights and so forth, but they're sitting doing nothing but pumping out pollution. Destroys the American dream of owning a home, dramatically increases the cost of living, and transfers private property rights to the government, artificially benefiting some while denying others, and throws the door wide open to corruption. It's really astonishing. Now, I've just given you the high points. I have a lot more detail in my book, Plundered, if you want to find out more. But it really is a very negative thing. We have about 20 minutes. I could talk about biodiversity, which will also affect New Hampshire, or do you want to just open it up for questions? Biodiversity? Okay. Biodiversity, the Convention on Biological Diversity is Chapter 15 and Agenda 21. And it's one of the most anti-human documents I have ever seen published by a government entity. The Global Biodiversity Assessment, there's a long story, I don't have time to get into it. We tried to convince the Senate Majority Leader, Mitchell at the time, that he needed to get a hold of this document out of the United Nations. The United Nations denied they even had it. We finally got it out of the IUCN the day before the treaty was to be ratified. In it, it says that property rights are not absolute, they're not unchanging, but rather a complex, dynamic, and shifting relationship between two or more parties over space or time. So the whole concept of this treaty is that the state controls private property rights, period. And if they want to change what it means, they change it. It's not unalienable. It goes on to say that one option for ensuring against excessive species depletion is the allocation of property rights. The reallocation of property rights implies redistribution of assets. Well, I guess it does, because instantaneously, as far as the bank is concerned, your property values have just been plummeted as far as being able to loan you money. Property rights can still be allocated to the environmental public good, but in this case, they should be restricted to usufructual. What is usufructual? It was the chapter 10 that this was in at the time. It's now chapter 13 in the final document, but at the time it was chapter 10. And it was 400 pages long. There was 4 of us. We each took 100 pages to read. This was the day before the treaty was to be ratified. We actually got this document, believe it or not, out of the IUCN. God does have a sense of humor. And what we found, I had this section, and what I found, I had to go look up in my college dictionary what usufruct meant. I was stunned. It basically means the Caesar owns everything. It was developed, the concept was developed under the Roman Empire. And this is what the concept, you won't find it in today's definitions or today's dictionaries. You have to go back to the 1950s editions to find it. But that's what it originally derived from. So everything is by permit. You can't do anything without a permit. It is estimated that an agricultural world in which most human beings are peasants should be able to support 5 to 7 billion people. Let's try it. Well, I really need that.
Maybe just a loose catch. I mean, it worked perfect.
Use on mine. Yeah, it probably is. Use on mine. I'm not going to take too long to reboot. I think I can do it this way. Yeah. Okay, let me just go back. How long has it been gone?
From the user
Usufructual. Okay, let me just go back to that one so at least you can see it. This is what was taken right out of the biodiversity assessment that was used to explain what the Convention on Biological Diversity was designed to do. Okay? All right. So, they also had this, that an agricultural world in which most human beings are peasants should be able to support 5 to 7 billion people. Well, we have 6.5 billion people on planet Earth now. So the only way that we can actually meet this requirement is to become agrarian peasants. In contrast, a reasonable estimate for an industrialized world society at the present North American material standard of living would be 1 billion people. That's the two options that they gave us to be able to save biodiversity. They also had that to protect biodiversity, representative areas of all major ecosystems in the region need to be preserved, and reserve blocks should be as large as possible. Buffer zones should be established around core areas, and that these corridors should connect these areas. This basic design is central to the Wildlands Project in the United States. Well, back in July, I went down to the Senate and talked to the Senate leadership that this treaty was designed to basically fulfill the conditions of the Wildlands Project. And I didn't have any linking documentation at the time. The treaty itself is only 18 pages long. This document now is 1,300 pages long. And in this statement, they're linking it directly to the Wildlands Project. We had the smoking gun, and this is what the Wildlands Project is designed to do. If I can get it advanced. Now, what's going on here? There. The red areas are wilderness areas where you can visit on a daily basis, but you don't do anything there. The yellow areas are where you can have very limited agriculture and human use. Not much green left, is there? Over 70% of the United States would be extremely restricted on the use. And you're starting to see that with some of the bills coming across in New Hampshire. That you've got to reduce this, you have to have green corridors and so forth. Now we stopped this, we put this map out on the Senate floor an hour before the cloture vote. And it literally brought the Senate down. I'd already explained to the Senate a couple months before that what this was designed to do, so once they saw this documentation and realized that this is exactly what the United Nations intended to do over a period of 100 years, it was never brought to the floor, it was never voted on. We stopped it an hour before the treaty was to be voted on. Okay, I think maybe we ought to stop here. I'll do this if you want to stay, but I want to open it up for some questions for those of you who are still here before I go on. Yes?
You're saying that you don't want
sustainable future, that it's okay to use up our.
Sustainable as a concept is fantastic. We need to make actions today that really fit that first definition. We don't want to do something stupid today that's going to limit future generations. That is okay. What they're doing is using that as a smokescreen to implement their religious doctrine, where we must protect Mother Earth at all costs. And that's what I object to. Because what we're doing, by all of what I described here, is basically eliminating the human rights to do anything without government control. And that's what the problem is. So, yes, sustainable is a good thing, but you have to understand the agenda behind it and where the end game of where they're taking us. It's not pleasant.
That last slide where it showed all the red, a lot of the big sections out west are desert or mountain areas where
Yes.
people aren't building in.
Well, that's debatable. I don't have time to get into that. I agree. That really is unconstitutional. I've heard the whole paper on that too, but nonetheless, the fact is, yes, most of those are national forests, Bureau of Land Management lands, national parks, and so forth. The question is, should the states or should the federal government own that land? It should be the states, according to the Constitution and the Equal Footing Doctrine.
Wouldn't we, Representative Hopper here, wouldn't we, if this goes through, would we fundamentally be in the same position Russia was?
Yes.
About 50 years ago, when people had no property rights, they
Right.
didn't own the property, and they didn't own what they made, and so that the economy was pretty much dead?
That's exactly right, and that's the direction we seem to be heading right now. And that's what I'm really alarmed about more than anything else, because of this Agenda 21, and has being implemented by the federal government without our knowledge. We are gradually taking away, we're killing the goose that laid the golden egg, is what it amounts to.
How can you say it's without our knowledge? You said on Google there are millions of hits on this.
I know.
Everybody has access.
I mean, anybody who wants to find out can find out. It's there. But if you, I don't know if you understood it or know about Agenda 21 before, but almost all your state legislatures across the country, your county commissioners, your town councils and so forth, they've never heard of Agenda 21. Yes. Yeah.
Because everyone is starting to become aware of this, I found out recently that they're starting to change their name from Agenda 21
Yes.
to something else. Can you share?
Oh, there are dozens of different names that they're going under. The future of this, the future of that type of thing. If you talk about visioning, if anything talks about visioning, they're asking a community to vision your community in 20 years. What would you like to see? Well, they'd like to see this great thing with open space and so forth. I mean, that's natural. It's human nature. Well, of course, then they start planning for it. Well, to do that, you've got to take people's rights away from them. And that's Agenda 21. That's exactly how they're implementing it. Yes.
Thank you. John Heichel from Goffstown. When you're talking about property rights and property owner rights, are you talking about the land rights also? The rights to that land, or are you talking about the property?
The rights to use the land. That's really what property rights are. Property doesn't have any rights. People have rights.
Correct. But going back years, aren't there contracts and things that we turned over that right of our land to the Department of Agriculture, for instance, back in 1933 when they seized our gold and our land to
Yeah, there are those,
money to pay off the
there's,
debt?
supposedly that's the case. I have not seen the actual documentation to prove that. I have heard about that, but I haven't heard it.
I think I might be able to help you out then.
It would be
I think what we
fantastic.
need to do is get our land back,
Yes.
get our property back.
Absolutely.
and-
If that's the case, then
and
that's the
void
first
these
step.
Contracts. I think that's what we need to
Yeah.
do.
If we can do that, that would be great.
Keep going on.
Do you think that the rising property taxes is a way of taking our property away? Because you get to the point, like I know a lot of elderly in our town.
Yeah. They
As the
can't,
taxes go up, they can't afford to live in their
they
homes.
can't afford to live. I don't know if it was actually planned that way. You know, some of the stuff that they do is very devious, so I can't be surprised if that was the case. But at the same time, it could be a natural byproduct of just an expanding government and the need to fund it. And that gets back to the whole progressive idea that government should control everything. And so by having a secondary effect, you're basically making it so expensive that people can't own the land anymore. Yes.
if you take and set aside farmland, say 100 acres here, 100 acres there, and you put a agriculture restriction on it, and you lower the taxes of that property owner, then the zero-sum game is that the taxes then increase on to everyone else.
Yes, that's true.
And a lot of people, in Concord, we had one city councilor vote against. It was like a 14-to-1 vote again. It said basically, look, we're taking a lot of land that isn't being built for housing off of the market, and you can only increase so much of, so there is that discussion on how this is moving in each little
Right.
town. An example,
Right.
that is happening because they're setting aside, and everybody wants to set aside the farmland, but at some point you've got to say, okay, how much farmland,
Right.
that's a discussion you have to have as part of it too. That doesn't seem to be
Yeah,
happening.
especially conservation easements.
Right.
That's a double-headed thing. Yes, you get some money now because of it, but what happens is you push the tax base on everybody else that you once were paying, and the so-called current use changes with time, and within 10 or 15 years, the regulations have changed, and you can't do what you did anymore.
Now, in most cases, it's always been farmland,
Yeah.
and they don't want to build McMansions. So, I mean, there's some positives and negatives, not editorializing, but that's what's happening in a lot of the places,
Right.
Hopkinton and Concord, and it does. All of a sudden, you're seeing your bill go up hundreds of dollars if you're retired, and it's,
Yeah.
anyway.
Mike, can I interject something for a second here? In New Hampshire, there are two entities, because Mike travels all over the country, he obviously can't keep track of every single one. Plan New Hampshire and Granite State Future. These are the two entities that, Plan New Hampshire conducts what they call charrettes, and you go to their website. A charrette is a fancy word for visionary session, and I got this in Ringe. And this is the initial stage. This is the town that buys into it. And then next thing you know, Granite State Future, which gets money from HUD and works the regional planning groups around the state. So those are the things we need to look out for here. So I'm sorry.
No, I think that's very good. I'm glad, I meant to bring that in and then forgot. We talked about it and then I forgot to bring it in. So yes, it's happening in every state across the country right now. And I'm very alarmed over where it's taking us because we become basically a tyrannical state. Now, the first couple of administrations may not be that bad, but sooner or later, politicians always take up the power that they're given, and plus some. And we're seeing evidence now that that's really happening in spades. So I am very concerned.
Can I ask you if you were to recommend specific actions on the level of, because the reverse of what you're saying is that everybody loves the trails and everybody loves the farmland preserve. I mean, there are some positives that come out of some of the
Yes.
things they're doing. But in your opinion, what actions do you think people should take or be aware of that as part of what you're presenting?
Well, as state legislatures and so forth, look to see what's behind the bill, because the bill is always going to be framed in very glowing, romantic language and so forth. Who winds up paying for this bill, for the regulations that are coming down? Is it the private landowner? Well, there are times when that's necessary. I'm not saying that all regulations are bad. But most of the time, in most bills today, basically you're doing something for the benefit of society, and you're allowing the community to decide what happens on that piece of property, which was never, ever the intent of our founders.
The state of New Hampshire came out with an RSA several years ago, and it's 2134A. And the intent of that RSA was to preserve the agriculture in this state.
Right.
What this legislator and the studies came out with was that we want the farms to stay, we want farmers to be able to produce an income that they can't produce otherwise with the products that they sell. I'm involved in a case with the town that the state has given the RSA that the town has adopted. The town does not want to honor this RSA.
Yeah.
And they're making me, I'm going to have to sue them or do something. But they will not honor the state RSA. It's the one RSA that came down from our legislator that helps the farmers. My physique is not one that would defend a state RSA. I would usually do it.
Yeah, you're usually
This one,
on the other side of the fence.
they finally came up with something that would help farmers and prevent them from losing their farms because of the exorbitant taxes that you pay on our farmland in this state. It's a sin.
I understand
It's
there's already a
legalized extortion that's going on here.
that's already in a lawsuit from another, maybe another municipality or town or whatever, against their particular zoning that's not obeying the RSA. So maybe you can team up with that person. I don't know who was told me before the meeting here, but find out if there's another lawsuit. Is it you? Okay. You've already spent quite a bit of money.
Oh, yes,
Yeah,
and the town does not want to, which the town
Right.
adapted the state RSA, but they will not honor it.
Right.
They want to change it completely.
Right. Yeah, and I think your lawsuit's got to have tremendous grounds and establish a precedent.
Well, the problem I have with this whole thing, and I'm not trying to take your stance here, is where are the legislators that wrote this RSA that aren't saying to the town, you adopted it, you use it in your zoning, what are you doing here?
Well-
What are you doing to this person?
You guys, you were state legislators at one time, or at least you were involved in that level. You know that you pass a bill and forget about it, you move right on. You don't ever pay any attention to see what that bill does. I don't care if it's Congress or a state legislator, the county commission, or whatever the case, it's the nature of politics.
Well, this is a regulation that I commend the legislators that created it, that wants to help and preserve the farms without doing this,
Yes.
without granted state futures, without having charrettes done or anything.
Right.
It's allowing me to produce an income on my property that will help everybody and pay my fair share of the taxes.
Right.
It's sad, it really is.
It's really sad. And unfortunately, when you get the mindset that the community ought to be in control of what you do,
I don't want.
you're done. The average citizen is done. It's called the tyranny of the majority. Our founders wrote much on the tyranny of the majority. That's why we have law. That's why we have the force of law in the Constitution that prevents that from happening, but we have thrown the Constitution right out the window.
I rent my property. I own it via the banks, but I rent my property. God forbid I can't